My DIL sneered, "Don't act blind, you're already useless." I didn't answer, I just listened to her fingers search my purse. That night, the audio file went to my lawyer. Within weeks, she was erased from my will, my deed, and every dollar I own. She thought I couldn't see her. She never saw me coming. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Joanne Merrill sat still on the living room sofa, the soft whir of the ceiling fan brushing air across her cheek like a silent metronome. Afternoon light filtered through the pine trees outside and danced across the blinds, but she couldn't see it, only feel the faint temperature shift where it cut across her skin. Her cane rested at her side, folded neatly. Her purse lay zipped at her feet. From the kitchen, Heather's voice rang out like a dropped glass. "She's already blind. What's the point of pretending she helps?" A beat of silence, then laughter. Not hers. Someone on speakerphone. Probably her sister, the one who hadn't visited since Christmas 3 years ago. Joanne didn't flinch. Didn't even move her head. But her fingers curled tighter around the folded newspaper in her lap. Her jaw clenched so subtly it was almost imperceptible. "You're in my house," she thought. "And you think I can't hear through walls?" Heather's steps padded toward the living room. The perfume arrived first. Sharp, synthetic, the kind that lingered long after sincerity left the room. "Oh, hey," Heather said breezily. "Didn't realize you were awake?" Joanne turned her head slightly. "I never said I wasn't." Heather smiled, or maybe smirked. The sound of it was thin and practiced. "Well, just finishing up some calls. Hope it wasn't too loud." She walked past the coffee table, brushing it with her hip. Joanne's reading glasses, useless for print but comforting to hold, teetered, then clattered to the floor. "Oops," Heather said, laughing. "Guess even I have vision issues now." Joanne reached down, feeling for the glasses. Her fingers grazed tile before they met the familiar weight and cold of metal frames. By the time she straightened up, Heather was already walking away. Later, after Heather left for some errands, Joanne rose carefully and tapped her way toward the foyer, her steps rehearsed from years of independence. She stopped at the console table and reached for her purse, always placed there, second hook from the left. But something felt off. The zipper was slightly open. The bag wasn't at its usual angle. She knew its every wrinkle and smell. Her hand slipped inside, lip balm, keys, transit card, tissues, no bills. She always kept 2 20s folded flat between the zipper lining and the back pocket. Always. Not for emergencies, just as a comfort. A habit born of decades teaching music lessons in cash. They were gone. Her heart didn't race, but her chest tightened. Not from fear, Joanne Merrill did not spook easily, but from the insult of it, of being underestimated. Again. By the time David got home from work, Joanne was sitting in her armchair with her purse zipped neatly on her lap. Dinner clinked from Heather's pots in the kitchen, meat sizzling, steam hissing, all domestic sounds masquerading as peace. She turned her head slightly toward her son as he passed. "David," she said calmly, "I think Heather's been going through my purse." He paused halfway to the coat rack, already shaking his head. "Mom, not this again." "I'm missing money." He sighed, more tired than upset. "You probably just misplaced them. You've said before that—" "I didn't." He crossed his arms, then rubbed the back of his neck like the tension could be massaged away. "You've got a lot going on lately. Just try not to jump to conclusions, okay?" "I don't jump," she said coolly. "I document." David didn't respond. That night, as Joanne sat in her room, hands folded over the same empty purse, Sophie knocked once and entered. The teenager smelled like cinnamon gum and charcoal pencils. "I brought you something," she whispered, and placed a fresh roll of quarters on Joanne's nightstand. "Just in case you need it for the bus. I know Mom keeps taking your 20s. Joanne tilted her head. "You think she is too?" Sophie hesitated, then nodded. "Do you trust her?" The question sat heavy between them. "I trust what I feel missing," Joanne said. The next morning, the doorbell rang just before 10. It was Marcia Lewin, crisp slacks and windbreaker, smelling faintly of lavender and dry Arizona air. She hugged Joanne with one arm, then set a small box on the kitchen counter. "Here," she said, clicking it open to reveal a sleek black digital recorder. "It's got timestamp, cloud sync, and a 2-week battery. Don't raise your voice, raise your archive." Joanne's hand brushed over the buttons, small but tactile. Her fingers trembled, not with weakness, but with direction. And somewhere deep behind her quiet eyes, a plan began to form. Joanne breathed slow and shallow through her nose, the quilt pulled just high enough to shadow her face in the late afternoon dim. The living room buzzed with the faint hum of cicadas through the cracked window. She could track the movement in the house by the rhythm of Heather's footsteps, hard heels against tile, then soft as they crossed the rug. Then silence. She's close. Joanne didn't move, didn't twitch. She'd trained herself to be still. Years of teaching piano to squirming children had made her an expert at commanding calm. A zipper peeled open, her purse. A hand slid inside, rustling fabric, disturbing the careful arrangement Joanne had memorized. Lip balm rolled, a keychain clinked against the buckle. Then the voice, low, careless, barely above a mutter. "She won't notice. She's blind." Joanne's thumb tapped once, barely moving, against the small recorder hidden beneath the blanket's edge. The red LED had long been covered with black tape, just in case, but she didn't need sight to know it had captured every syllable. She counted to 20 after Heather's footsteps left the room, then 30 more, to be sure. Finally, she sat up, slow and deliberate, unfolded the quilt, and held the recorder to her chest. There was no rage, no shaking hands, just clarity. She pressed play. Heather's voice came through with eerie precision. The sound of the zipper, the purse, the insult. Joanne let it play twice. By the time Marcia arrived that evening, bringing with her the scent of orange peels and Arizona dust, Joanne had the recorder cupped in her hand like a communion offering. They sat at the kitchen table, Marcia leaning forward with her elbows pressed into the wood. Joanne played it again. Marcia didn't interrupt. She listened all the way through, her jaw slowly setting as the recording ended. Then she looked up and said flatly, "This isn't memory loss. This is evidence." Joanne nodded once. No fanfare, just confirmation of what she already knew. Marcia clicked her tongue softly, thinking. She didn't even bother to whisper. That's how certain she was you wouldn't hear or wouldn't matter. "She's certain of a lot of things," Joanne said. Marcia touched her arm. "She shouldn't be." The door creaked open down the hall, then slammed. Sophie's voice carried faintly through the walls, agitated. Joanne leaned toward the kitchen doorway, listening. Footsteps. Then a burst of laughter from Heather. "She's needy and paranoid," Heather was saying. "I swear, one of these days she's going to accuse me of stealing her damn house." Another laugh. The kind that assumed no one else could hear. Joanne sat back in her chair. Her face was expressionless, but her fingers tapped lightly on the recorder. Later that night, the house was still. Heather and David had gone to bed, he oblivious as ever, she smug in her quiet cruelty. Joanne sat at her desk, the smart speaker glowing faint blue as she gave it instructions in a calm, measured tone. "Upload file, yes, that one. Label, May 7th, Heather Purse Audio. Send copy to Cloud folder. Share with Marcia Lewin, read-only access." A soft confirmation tone chirped. The file was gone, but not lost. She folded the recorder back into its padded case, then slid it behind the Braille copy of Little Women on the third shelf. Her fingers traced the spine of the book, then hovered there, thoughtful. A breeze crept in through the cracked window, stirring the kitchen curtain. Tomorrow, she would not ask, not hint, not accuse. Tomorrow she would wait, still and quiet, just long enough to catch the next lie falling from Heather's mouth. Joanne didn't hear Sophie come in. She rarely did when the girl was quiet on purpose. "I didn't wrap it," Sophie said from behind her, nervous energy tucked between each word. "And I know it's early, but happy birthday, Grandma." Joanne turned toward the soft voice, smiling. "It's not early, it's right on time." A box was placed gently in her lap, smooth matte cardboard taped only once. Joanne ran her fingers across the lid and lifted. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, were a pair of lightweight glasses, sleek, angular, with a faint ridge along the temples. They're called Orpheus. I used my savings. They've got built-in audio prompts, object detection, even a discreet camera. Sophie's words were breathless. You can record everything. Voice-activated, no lights, no obvious signs. It syncs to your cloud like the recorder. Joanne lifted them carefully, weighing the newness. Stylish, she said with a sly grin. Sophie laughed. The app is already set up. Just say, Orpheus, start recording. Try it. Joanne adjusted the frames, fitting them gently across her nose. Orpheus, start recording. A soft vibration tickled her temple. Then a chime. Recording. For the first time in a long time, she felt not watched, but watchful. Later that morning, as Joanne sat in her usual spot by the window, Heather came in with the mail, magazines in one hand, irritation in the other. Oh, look, Heather snorted. We've entered the tech phase. Very mission, geriatric impossible. What are you going to do, live stream your knitting? Joanne didn't respond. She turned her head slowly in Heather's direction. The glasses recorded all of it. The mockery, the angle of her body, the way Heather's fingers reached toward the purse again. Need help organizing your coupons? Heather asked sweetly. Joanne smiled faintly. I've always been organized. Heather left, laughter trailing behind her like a perfume cloud. An hour later, Joanne reviewed the footage using voice prompts. The resolution was low, just silhouettes, outlines, broad strokes of motion, but enough to make it clear. Heather had removed something from the zippered pouch in her purse. A moment later, the glint of gift cards flickered across the frame. Joanne paused the playback. Orpheus, save file. Title, June 2nd, gift card theft. Upload. That night, she and Marcia sat in the back booth of the cafe on Aspen Avenue, tucked between local realtors and retirees debating the weather. You've got a building case now, Marcia said over the rim of her tea, but I want you to meet someone. He helped me when my brother passed, cleaned up a whole mess of estate tampering, sharp as hell, works exclusively with older clients. Joanne raised an eyebrow. Someone who doesn't talk down to the blind and the old? He talks up to them, Marcia said with a wink. Name's Caleb Price. I already told him a bit. I didn't use names. By Thursday, Caleb Price stood in Joanne's living room, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, laptop open. He listened without interruption as Joanne played the purse audio, then the Orpheus footage. When both finished, he leaned back, arms crossed, eyebrows lifted. Well, he said, that's not just theft. That's a pattern and a motive. Joanne adjusted her glasses, saying nothing. I've seen families burned over less, he continued, flipping through scanned documents. Your property's still in your name. Your bank accounts have no secondary authorization. Good. But your will, it's outdated. By design, Joanne replied. Let Heather believe what she wants. He smiled slowly. Smart. Because right now, you've got more leverage than they do. Marcia looked over from the kitchen counter. Told you. Joanne folded her hands in her lap. So, what happens next? Caleb closed the laptop. Next, we tighten everything and start the clock. As he gathered his things to leave, Joanne stood beside the door, one hand on the cane, the other adjusting her new glasses. Do you think she'll stop? Marcia asked from behind her. Joanne didn't answer right away. Her fingers tapped lightly on the side of the frames. She doesn't see what I'm doing, she finally said, but I see her. Every time. Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping pine needles across the front walk. Inside, Caleb's voice returned with a question that hung in the air like a thundercloud ready to break. Joanne, has she ever tried using your identity for anything? It started with a call Joanne didn't expect. The pharmacist's voice was polite, even cheerful, but something in it sounded rehearsed. Mrs. Merrill, just a quick confirmation. Did you authorize a pickup for your Eliquis refill today? Woman gave your name but didn't match our file photo. Joanne sat straighter in her kitchen chair, one hand resting lightly on the table's edge. What did she give you? A copy of your ID, black and white, slightly off-center, and your social security number. Is that typical? Joanne's fingers tightened around the cane resting beside her. "No," she said, her voice razor-sharp. "It is not." Caleb was at the house within 2 hours. He moved fast when the words identity misuse hit the conversation. His laptop was already open on the dining table by the time Joanne explained what had happened. "She used your social security number?" he repeated. "For meds?" Joanne nodded once. Or tried. He typed for a full minute, fingers flying. "We'll place a soft fraud alert first. It flags your credit file without launching a formal investigation. Yet. But it creates a digital timestamp. That's what matters." "And it doesn't alert Heather?" Joanne asked. "Nope, she won't know a thing. But if she tries again, the system will." He leaned back and exhaled. "That's attempted medical fraud. And if she's doing that, she's not just stealing from your wallet. She's assuming your identity." Joanne stared ahead, fingers drumming a slow pattern on the table. "Then I'll stop assuming she has mine." That afternoon, with Marcia seated nearby for moral backup, Joanne called her primary physician's office and revoked Heather's access. Then she called her lawyer's office and had a notarized form sent over removing Heather from power of attorney. The final call was to her emergency contact list. "Please remove Heather Merrill," she told the receptionist, "permanently." Marcia slid a lemon cookie across the table like a reward. "I know you don't want to make waves," she said gently, "but sometimes waves are exactly what protect the shore." Joanne didn't touch the cookie. "Waves erode too. I'm aiming to outlast her." That evening, David showed up with takeout, Thai food, Heather's choice. She didn't come in, just waited in the car. Joanne sat across from him in the living room, the scent of lemongrass floating between them. "She told me you're pulling all sorts of strings now," David said, flipping open a container. "Is this because of the money thing again?" "It's because of many things," Joanne said coolly. David shrugged like she was talking about weather. "I think you're being dramatic, Mom." Joanne raised her brows, saying nothing. There was a time his indifference would have bruised her. Now it barely registered. "You've always wanted to believe she's a good wife," she said. "What if she's not even a legal one anymore?" David looked up, chopsticks frozen midair. "What's that supposed to mean?" Joanne stood slowly, reached for her cane. "It means maybe you should ask her what name she used at the pharmacy yesterday." She left him in the silence. The next morning the doorbell rang. Twice, sharp and clean. Joanne opened it to find a woman in uniform. Not full patrol, but official enough. Brown hair pulled back, not a hint of judgment in her expression. "Officer Leslie Tran," the woman said quietly. "Routine welfare check." Joanne tilted her head. "You weren't sent by Heather, were you?" "No, ma'am. We had a pharmacy flag and a legal fraud alert. I'd just like to talk." Joanne stepped aside and motioned toward the kitchen. "Talk is welcome. Recording is preferred." They sat for nearly an hour. Joanne explained calmly. Clearly, she didn't embellish. She didn't need to. Officer Tran asked precise questions, took careful notes. Then, as she stood to leave, she said, "You seem quite capable, Mrs. Merrill." "I am," Joanne replied, "but I've spent too long letting people believe otherwise." That night, Marcia arrived with a folder. "I did some digging," she said, dropping it gently onto the table. Inside were bank summaries, Joanne's accounts, Heather's withdrawals, overlapping dates, matching ATM locations, transfers just under reporting thresholds. "Half a dozen suspicious patterns," Marcia murmured. "She's been bleeding you slow, like a leech, just enough to hide it in shadows." Joanne closed the folder. No panic, no surprise, just the clarity of a pattern that had finally drawn itself in full. "I'm done collecting shadows," she said. Marcia's phone buzzed from her purse. She checked it, then froze. "It's Caleb. He says we need to talk. Immediately. Heather just tried to access your online mortgage account." Joanne's lips parted slightly. Her cane tapped once against the floor. "Then let's shine the lights." The notary's pen clicked like a gavel in the quiet of Joanne's study. Caleb laid the final document on the table. "One signature here," he said, sliding the page toward her, "and your house belongs to the trust, not to your name, not to your heirs, just to the terms you set." Joanne's fingers traced the embossed paper. The language was crisp, exact. Sophie's name sat beside Marcia's, their roles clearly spelled out. Co-trustees, with full authority upon incapacitation or death. Not Heather, not David. "I've lived here 32 years, Joanne said, almost to herself. "I've worn these floors in with memory. And now," Caleb said, "no one can take them from you." She signed, slow and deliberate. The ink settled like a final piano note. Heather found out 2 days later, when the county clerk's deed update pinged her alert system. Joanne was in the kitchen when the first shout cracked down the hall. "What the hell is this?" The voice came from David's phone speaker. Joanne didn't need to see the screen. The venom in Heather's tone was unmistakable. "You didn't even tell me she was changing the deed. That house was supposed to be ours." "It's her house," David said weakly. "No, it was her house. Now it's some trust she cooked up with that poetry brat and the nosy neighbor." Joanne didn't react. She stirred her tea with the same steady rhythm. She'd lived long enough to know that storms announce themselves with noise, but damage came quietly afterward. Upstairs, Sophie's door slammed. Sophie didn't come down for dinner. Joanne found her later in the backyard, sitting cross-legged on the cool stone path, sketchpad open but untouched. "She grounded me," Sophie said without looking up. "No phone. No car. I'm supposed to think about loyalty." Joanne sat beside her, knees creaking as they folded under her frame. "You defended me," Joanne said softly. "She said I was choosing sides." Sophie blinked hard, "But I was just choosing what was right." Joanne reached for her hand. "Some things," she said, "are worth the punishment." Sophie squeezed back, eyes glassy but firm. "Promise me she won't win." "She won't," Joanne said. "She already can't." By the end of the week, a certified letter arrived at Heather's doorstep. Caleb had mailed it directly, sealed, notarized, precise. The text was short and final. "You have been formally removed as a beneficiary to the Merrill estate, effective immediately." David came storming through Joanne's front door that night, eyes wild, words hot. "Are you happy?" he snapped. "You've destroyed this family." Joanne was sitting in her reading chair, tea cooling on the table beside her. She didn't stand. "I protected myself," she said. "You could have just talked to us." "I did," she replied. "You weren't listening." David's fists clenched at his sides. "So now it's just you and Sophie and that lawyer? That's your family now?" Joanne turned her head slowly toward him. "That's my future." He stared at her for a long time, something brittle breaking just behind his eyes. "You think you're so noble," he muttered, "but all you've done is turn us against each other." Joanne reached down, smoothed a wrinkle in her blanket. "No, David, I just stopped pretending you were all on my side." That night, the house was quieter than usual. Joanne sat at her desk, the soft hum of the Orpheus glasses charging beside her. The moonlight traced through the blinds like silent bars. From her drawer, she pulled the old photograph, David at age 10, sitting beside a piano, proud and unknowing. She held it briefly, then tucked it into a folder labeled Prior Versions. Then she opened a fresh folder and began typing a new label, Inheritance, Final Structure. She didn't hear Sophie's footsteps until the girl stood in the doorway. "You're rewriting it all, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Joanne turned in her chair, her face unreadable. "I'm making sure the people who watched me fade," she said, "get written out just as quietly." Outside, the Merrill porch light flickered. Inside, Caleb's email alert pinged across her screen. Subject: "She just tried to access the trust account." Message preview: "From a hotel Wi-Fi network in Sedona, you ready to escalate?" Joanne reached for her glasses. "Oh, I'm ready." The call came just before noon on a Tuesday. Not the pharmacy this time, Officer Tran. She tried again, Tran said quietly. "Different pharmacy. Prescott this time. Presented a printed copy of your ID and insurance card." Joanne steadied the phone against her cheek, standing barefoot in the kitchen. The tile was cool. Her hands were still. "Prescription?" she asked. "Xarelto. Same dosage you take, same name, but wrong address and signature." The text stalled her, asked to check the file. Heather walked out mid-conversation. They called it in right after. Joanne exhaled once, slowly. What happens now? Tran's voice sharpened. We're opening a formal file. This is crossing from petty theft to attempted identity fraud. Good, Joanne said. I'm done playing receptionist to her criminal resume. Caleb came by that afternoon. A cloud had settled over the pines outside, heavy with the threat of summer rain. Inside, Joanne sat upright at her desk, her cane across her lap, her glasses fully charged. He set up the camera tripod with the calm of someone who'd done this a dozen times before, but even he didn't rush her. You don't have to do it today, he said. I want to, Joanne replied, before she makes another move. The red light blinked on. She faced the lens, not stiff, not rehearsed, just steady. My name is Joanne Merrill. I am of sound mind, though diminished sight. This is my final will, and I make it freely, without coercion or pressure. All previous versions are hereby revoked. Her voice didn't waver. She named Sophie as her full legal heir and executor. She affirmed the revocable trust, the property, the bank accounts, and the conditions. Heather Merrill and David Merrill are to receive nothing, not because I am bitter, but because I am observant. What they discarded in private, I collected in silence, and now in clarity. Caleb didn't interrupt. He let the camera run until Joanne turned her face slightly and gave a small nod. I'll have the transcript drawn and notarized within the week, he said, beginning to pack up. Make sure Sophie gets a digital copy, Joanne added. Even if I don't say it enough, she needs to know I trust her more than I ever trusted him. That evening, the house was unusually quiet. Joanne sat at the kitchen table, turning a small folded sheet of paper between her fingers. Sophie had slipped it under her door, no fanfare, just her name written in pencil on the outside. She unfolded it. At the top, The Eyes That Still See. It wasn't a poem in the traditional sense. It was fragmented, spare. But every line pulsed. You blinked, and I saw it. Not blindness, but strength. They forgot you were watching. And still they spoke loud. Now the quiet is theirs. Joanne read it twice, then a third time. She pressed it gently to her heart and whispered, She'll be fine. Marcia came by later that night, fresh from evening service, smelling faintly of sandalwood and cinnamon rolls. She didn't bring a casserole, just a folded bulletin from the church office. I thought you'd appreciate the front quote, she said, sliding it onto Joanne's fridge with a ceramic magnet shaped like a sunflower. Joanne walked to it slowly, letting her fingers trace the raised ink. Honor widows who live wisely. 1 Timothy 5:3. She smiled. Wisdom doesn't mean waiting quietly anymore. Marcia chuckled. No, it doesn't. They sat together for a while. No need for words. Just the slow comfort of shared space. Later, after Marcia left, Joanne sat in bed with the lights dimmed, the sound of pine branches scratching softly at the windows. The house felt clean, not in the literal sense, though it always was, but clean of delusion, of false family, of fear. Then her phone vibrated, a new voicemail. She recognized the number, Heather's old co-worker from the dental clinic. She played it on speaker. Hi, Joanne. I don't want to stir the pot, but someone tried calling in to verify your insurance again today. Same birth date, same last four, but the voice didn't sound like you. The message ended in a tone that was less concern than apology. Joanne sat still. Then she whispered aloud, like a line meant for no one but the dark. She's not just taking from me anymore. She's becoming me. Her hand reached for her recorder, calm but decisive. Orpheus, start recording. File title, Impersonation, Escalation. The leather-bound journals had lived in the top left drawer of Joanne's dresser for over a decade. Some were cracked and sun-warped, others still smelled of fresh binding and lavender oil. They held 30 years of names, notes, and quiet reckonings, records of who came, who didn't, who helped, who didn't. Now they were her script. Each morning, Joanne sat at her kitchen table with a fresh cup of tea, her recorder propped on a stand, and a journal opened before her. She didn't rush. Her voice, though soft, was firm, controlled. Each date, each memory, landed like footsteps on hardwood. March 12, 2009. Heather asked to borrow $20 for gas, never repaid. David told me not to bring it up. July 4th, 2014. Sophie drew me a flag and called me her freedom grandma. Still have it on the fridge. December 22nd, 2020. Heather said I was wasting air after asking her to check the mail. Sophie apologized for her. She read steadily, her tone never bitter, just exact. Not a single page was wasted. Every entry reminded her of who had truly been watching whom. Heather heard the recordings one afternoon and laughed, loud enough for Joanne to hear through the floor vents. "She's up there narrating her descent into dementia," Heather said through a mouthful of chips. "Old ladies recording the weather and calling it trauma." Joanne paused the recorder mid-sentence. She didn't say a word. She simply saved the file and titled it, "Dismissed by Design." That evening, Sophie found her in the den. "I think I want to borrow one," Sophie said, motioning to the recorder. Joanne turned her head. "To do what?" Sophie smiled just enough to look mischievous, but her eyes were dead serious. "Make a playlist." The next night at dinner, the air was already tense before the food hit the plates. David sat at the head of the table, scrolling his phone between bites. Heather picked at her salad and checked her watch twice. Joanne ate silently, her Orpheus glasses perched like armor. Suddenly, the Bluetooth speaker on the mantel chimed. Then Joanne's voice filled the room, calm and unhurried. April 8th, 2018. Heather called me a dried-up ornament. I wrote it down so I'd remember it was real. Heather froze, fork midair. October 3rd, 2021. Sophie cleaned the porch after Heather forgot. She didn't want credit. I gave it to her anyway. David looked up, his jaw tightening. June 7th, 2022. I found my purse turned inside out. The 20s were missing again. Heather said it was the wind. Heather shot to her feet. "What the hell is this?" Sophie met her gaze. "Just something she recorded. Thought it deserved a bigger audience." "You think this is funny?" Heather snapped. David stood suddenly, voice rising. "That's enough, both of you." Joanne didn't move. "She's not the one making noise," Joanne said quietly. "She's just pressing play." David turned on Sophie, red-faced. "You're taking her side now?" Sophie stood her ground. "I'm taking the side that doesn't lie." He scoffed, grabbed his keys, and stormed out without a plate, the door rattling behind him. Heather stayed frozen for a moment longer, then stormed upstairs, muttering, "Unbelievable. This is psychological warfare." Joanne took another bite of her roll. "Well," she said, "that would make you a POW." Caleb filed the affidavit that night. "Audio recordings, pattern of withdrawal, fraudulent prescription attempts, and now psychological isolation," he said over the phone. "This meets threshold. I'm filing under Arizona's Elder Abuse Prevention Act. Trans backing us." Joanne didn't respond at first. Her fingers hovered over the braille-embossed envelope Sophie had left on her pillow. Another poem draft. "She wrote me off, as if memory fades, but silence writes louder when no one's listening." Joanne smiled faintly. "Send it." "You sure?" Caleb asked. "I've waited too long to forget." That night, she added a new journal entry, not spoken into the recorder, but written by hand. August 5th, 2025. They thought forgetting would come before justice. But justice remembers what they don't. The house went dark. Down the hall, Sophie's light clicked on, and upstairs, Heather's phone buzzed with a new notification. "You've been formally named in an elder abuse affidavit. Please contact Officer Tran immediately." Heather opened the door wearing eyeliner too thick for morning and a robe that smelled faintly of vodka and vanilla lotion. She didn't recognize the woman at first. "Officer Tran," the woman said, holding up a small badge and stepping just far enough forward to force Heather to shift. Beside her stood a second figure, mid-40s, plain clothes, gray notebook already open. "This is Investigator Daryl Knox. We're here in response to a pending elder abuse affidavit." Heather scoffed. "Seriously? For Joanne?" She leaned against the doorframe. "She's been collecting stories like cats for years. Next, she'll say I stole her piano." Tran didn't flinch. "We'd like to come in." "No, thank you," Heather said, folding her arms. Tran reached into her jacket and held up a tablet. "We have a legal right to serve you with the affidavit. And play this recording. You can listen here or we'll deliver it at the hearing." Heather's smirk twitched, just enough to register. She didn't invite them in, but she stepped back. The house was clean, but over-decorated, as if trying to make itself feel like more than it was. David appeared in the hallway, barefoot, eyes puffy. "What's going on?" Tran turned the volume up and pressed play. "She won't notice. She's blind." Zipper sound, purse rustling. Another voice. Unmistakable. Heather's. "Just taking back what she doesn't need." Heather's face went white. David blinked once, then twice. "That's not me," Heather said quickly. David didn't look at her. "Yes, it is." "Joanne's manipulating this whole thing," Heather snapped. "She's planting stories in Sophie's head, now in yours." Tran shut off the tablet. "This isn't Sophie's voice, Mrs. Merrill. It's yours. And it's consistent with multiple incidents already reported, some with video support." Heather backed up a step. "She's blind. She can't—" Tran met her eyes. "She's not deaf, and she's not powerless." For the first time, Heather had nothing to say. Back at Joanne's house, the doorbell rang just after lunch. Marcia stepped in with a paper bag in one hand and a folder in the other. "Before you ask," she said, setting both on the counter. "The bag is cinnamon scones. The folder is documentation." Joanne smiled. "My kind of houseguest." Marcia opened the folder. "I pulled church donation logs. Yours are all verified, consistent, dated. Hers?" She raised her brows. "Not one donation from Heather in over 5 years, but she sure liked telling people she gave every month." Joanne touched the folder but didn't open it. "A lie that feels generous is still a lie." "I thought this might matter," Marcia said, gesturing to the folder. "It will," Joanne said, "but not in court." Later that evening, after Sophie returned from a shift at the library, Joanne called her into the den. There was no ceremony, just a small blue box wrapped in linen cloth. "I want you to have this," Joanne said. Sophie opened it slowly, then looked up. "Your Braille watch?" "It doesn't tick loud," Joanne said, "but it never runs late, and it tells you something digital time never can." Sophie turned it over in her palm. "What's that?" Joanne smiled. "Time doesn't just reveal, it exposes." Sophie slipped it on, the band too big but somehow perfect. That night, while Sophie read in bed and Marcia dozed in the armchair by the front window, Joanne received a notification. From Caleb. Subject: "It's time." Attachment: "Court summons, Merrill vs. Merrill." Notes: "Restitution hearing confirmed, mid-September. You'll want to prepare testimony." Joanne tapped the screen, then let the phone rest beside her untouched tea. She leaned back, breath steady. Outside, the pines shifted in the night wind. Inside, the house seemed to exhale with her. Then, from the guest room, Marcia stirred and muttered in her sleep. "They're going to realize she's not the one who's been fading." Joanne smiled in the dark. Across town, in the bedroom of a house too clean and too cold, Heather stared at the same notification on her phone. She didn't speak. David stood behind her, unreadable. "You said none of this could trace back," he said. Heather whispered, "I didn't think she'd fight." And David's answer was the cruelest one yet. "Maybe you never really knew her at all." The courtroom smelled like old wood and older decisions. Flagstaff Municipal Courthouse wasn't grand. It creaked more than it echoed, but it held the kind of quiet that made every movement feel deliberate, every cough, every rustle of paper, every sigh. It all mattered here. Heather sat at the defendant's table in a fitted navy blazer, hair straighter than usual, makeup sharp. But her fingers twitched. She kept glancing sideways at David, who hadn't said more than 10 words since they arrived. At the front of the courtroom, Judge Langley adjusted his glasses and called the docket. People of Arizona vs. Heather Merrill. Charges: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, identity fraud, and misrepresentation of medical authority. Joanne entered just as the judge finished the statement. She moved with precision, her cane tapping once per step, her Orpheus glasses glinting faintly under the recessed lights. Sophie walked beside her, holding her elbow lightly but not guiding her. Just present. The hush in the room shifted. Everyone noticed. Caleb helped Joanne to her seat beside him, whispering something brief she didn't need repeated. She nodded once and faced forward. She didn't need to see Heather to know she'd gone pale again. David was called first. He swore in with a voice that barely rose above the hum of the overhead fans. The prosecutor asked simple questions when he became aware of the accusations, whether he witnessed any incidents firsthand, whether he'd ever seen Heather withdraws cash on Joanne's behalf. No, he answered each time. Did your mother ever express concern to you? David hesitated. She made comments. What kind of comments? He looked down at his hands. She said Heather was taking things, that she didn't feel safe. And did you take those concerns seriously? His voice faltered. I didn't know what to believe. Joanne didn't move. She sat perfectly still, fingers folded over her lap, face unreadable. Next came Officer Tran. Her testimony was surgical. The defendant used the victim's personal information to attempt multiple pharmacy pickups in separate locations. She also accessed bank withdrawals just under reportable thresholds. The digital footprint was consistent with intentional concealment. She pulled up time-stamped video and audio logs. A Bluetooth speaker on the side table crackled to life with Heather's voice. She won't notice. She's blind. Joanne didn't blink. Tran continued. The victim was not confused. She was organized. She recorded, documented, and archived everything, and she did so under her own power. The prosecutor asked, Do you believe the victim was mentally and cognitively sound during the collection of this evidence? Tran looked toward Joanne. Yes, I believe she was sharper than half this courtroom. Then Sophie took the stand. She was dressed in a simple black blouse, hair pulled back, notebook in hand. Her voice, when she read, was clear, strong. These are transcripts from audio journals. She recorded them herself. They include dates, specific financial discrepancies, and, she flipped a page, a list of pharmacy requests Heather made without permission. Why did you bring these forward? Because I believe people deserve to be heard, Sophie said, even if they've been ignored for years. Heather rolled her eyes visibly. The prosecutor rested his case. Heather was called to testify. She stood tall, but her posture didn't match the trembling in her hands. Her eyes darted to David, then to the bench, then, reluctantly, to Joanne. I never meant to hurt her, Heather said, her voice cracking at the edges. She was just there. She didn't do anything. She just sat in that house like a statue. Is that why you took money from her? The judge asked. Heather flinched. Look, I was taking care of her. She didn't need half of it. You were listed as power of attorney without legal execution. You filled prescriptions using her ID. She made me feel invisible, Heather snapped. Joanne turned her head slightly. And so you tried to erase me? The courtroom went still. Judge Langley leaned forward, voice level. You made her property your ATM. Heather blinked, stunned into silence. As the hearing closed, Judge Langley reviewed the affidavit in silence. Then he spoke without looking up. Restitution hearing is set for September 18th. In the meantime, Ms. Merrill, you are prohibited from approaching or contacting Joanne Merrill or Sophie Merrill in any form, verbal, digital, or third party. Heather sat down hard. David didn't move to help her. The bailiff called recess. Outside the courtroom, under the cloud-covered sun, Sophie wrapped her arm around Joanne's. She didn't expect that, Sophie whispered. No, Joanne said. She expected to be the only one who got to speak. Caleb approached from behind. Restitution's just step 1, he said, handing Joanne a sealed envelope. This, step 2. Joanne opened it. Inside, a legal draft of a restraining order and a property lien notice against Heather's personal assets. Joanne nodded, calm. Then her voice dropped to a whisper that only Sophie heard. Let's see how she handles being the one written out. The notary was young, respectful, and silent, exactly how Joanne preferred her witnesses. She signed the last page of the amended trust documents with a pen Sophie had chosen. Simple, matte black, no flash. Just function. Caleb closed the binder carefully and slid it into a fireproof briefcase. That's it, he said. Sophie's now the named executor, full authority if anything happens. And everything, house, account balances, royalties, even the Braille book collection, is shielded. Joanne nodded. She'll carry it well. Caleb's voice softened. She already is. The kitchen clock ticked into late afternoon. Shadows stretched through the blinds, long and thin. Outside, cicadas droned like a dusty metronome. They sat quietly for a while, until Joanne said, "Do we have enough left for one more gift?" Caleb leaned forward. "Define gift." She smiled faintly. "A scholarship, not a big one, just something with his name on it, something... music." Caleb's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Any preference?" "Piano, and sight-impaired students. Doesn't need to go to the best, just someone who listens." He paused, then glanced up. "Got it." He clicked enter. "There," he said. "The Kenneth Merrill Legacy Fund is now a legal entity, tax-free, active. First grant can be issued within the year." Joanne tilted her head. "Then we begin again." That night, her inbox pinged with a single email. From David. No subject line, no attachments, just a message sitting unopened, unread. Joanne hovered over it for a long moment. Her cursor blinked. Her pulse didn't. Then she hit delete. She didn't even open the trash folder. The silence felt earned. The next morning, she found Sophie in the sunroom, hunched over a cardboard box filled with sheet music, half stapled, half yellowed, some in Braille, some with notes scribbled by teenage hands she hadn't seen in decades. "What's all this?" Joanne asked. "Old students' compositions," Sophie said. "I found them in the hall closet. Figured it was time they came out of hiding." Joanne reached in and picked up a folded piece of paper. She ran her fingers across the raised dots. C major, staggered rhythm, for Ms. M. Dot. "I didn't know you kept all this," Sophie whispered. "I kept what mattered," Joanne replied, "even when they thought I couldn't." Sophie held up a handwritten card with glitter still stuck to one corner. "You've always been a conductor." Just quietly. That evening, Marcia hosted a dinner. Not a celebration, just a gathering. Her house smelled like rosemary and baked apples. 4 neighbors came. One brought a pie, another brought a poem. They ate on the back patio as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long, golden threads across the tablecloth. Laughter was soft, gentle, nothing showy. Marcia raised her glass toward Joanne. "For the woman," she said, "who sees more than most of us ever will." Joanne didn't blush, didn't demur. She simply nodded and tapped her glass against Sophie's. As the sun disappeared entirely, someone turned on the patio lights, soft yellow globes strung across the fence, glowing like patient stars. Later that night, long after guests had left, and Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch with a folder of sheet music still open on her lap, Joanne walked into her bedroom. Her Orpheus glasses rested on the nightstand, their battery light blinking once every few seconds. The house was silent, not just in sound but in presence, empty of lies, clean of manipulation. She walked to the window and opened it slightly. The wind carried in the faintest hum, a piano, maybe from the neighbor's record player. Faded, imperfect, and beautiful. She turned toward her desk, opened her drawer, and pulled out one final envelope. On the front, written in ink that hadn't smudged after all this time, were the words, "To be opened only when I forget who I am." She smiled, and without reading it, she tucked it into a fireproof safe. Then, a chime. Her phone buzzed. A new alert. Subject, property transfer complete. Recipient, Sophie Merrill. Effective date, immediate upon incapacitation. Joanne tapped the screen, locked it, slipped it into the drawer, then whispered into the dark, "Balance restored." The appeal didn't even make it to a hearing. Judge Langley issued the ruling via formal letter, dry and final. All prior findings remain intact. The evidence presented was neither contradicted nor discredited. Appeal is denied. Caleb forwarded the PDF to Joanne that morning with a subject line that simply read, "Closure, attached." She didn't open the file. She didn't need to. She sat in her usual spot by the front window with the Arizona sun warming her ankles through the glass and whispered, she underestimated the end as much as the beginning. Sophie came every Thursday now. She didn't need prompting. No one arranged it. She just appeared, with fresh produce from the co-op, or old piano sheet music from the school, or 2 kinds of pasta because she could never remember which one Joanne preferred. They cooked, they read, they worked through Joanne's audio recordings one by one, labeling them, sorting them into folders. On week 3, Sophie pulled a small package from her tote bag. "It's not fancy," she said, "but I found it on clearance." Joanne opened the box slowly. Inside was a new music box, sleek, black, and modern, with a discreet keypad on the bottom. "What's the code?" Joanne asked. Sophie grinned. "It's Braille." Joanne's fingers brushed the tiny raised dots. A single word. "Trust." She laughed, actually laughed, and for a moment her whole face softened. Later that afternoon, she set the music box on her bedroom shelf beside the old broken one and tapped the code in with practiced ease. A quiet melody filled the air, clear, resonant, and just slightly off-tempo, imperfect, alive. Marcia stopped by that evening, carrying 2 plastic containers of egg salad and a bag of shortbread cookies shaped like treble clefs. When she saw the music box, she nearly doubled over, laughing. "You locked it?" she asked. "With a Braille keypad?" Marcia shook her head. Poetic justice with a hinge. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door, not sharp or urgent, just present. Officer Tran stood on the porch in jeans and a blue t-shirt with a little tear near the shoulder seam. She carried a slim paper bag. "I'm not here on duty," she said, "but I've been thinking about you a lot." Joanne stepped back and let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. Tran didn't make small talk. She just reached into the bag and pulled out a set of Braille playing cards, clean, well-balanced, a slight texture to the back. "They're custom," she said. "I found a woman in New Mexico who makes them by hand. Thought maybe you and Sophie could start playing something cutthroat." Joanne smiled and ran her fingers across the deck. "Poker or gin?" Tran raised an eyebrow. "I figured you'd prefer blackjack." Joanne laughed again, the sound light but laced with something old and earned. "You figured right." They played 2 rounds. Joanne won both before Tran stood to leave. "You should know," she said gently. "Your home's officially flagged as a protected estate now. No financial claims can be processed without trustee verification. You're insulated." Joanne's fingers paused mid-shuffle. "Thank you," she said. "No," Tran replied. "Thank you." That night, Joanne walked the perimeter of her home with her hand grazing the walls, the plaster, the light switches, the door frames she'd memorized decades ago. No alarms, no fear, just presence. She returned to the front room and opened the new music box. The notes drifted out like warm breath. She let them play. Then she turned to her recorder. "August 28th. I am protected. The estate is no longer exposed. The threat has been removed. My granddaughter still shows up. My son still disappears. My neighbor still brings scones that crumble too fast. The balance of things is imperfect, but I'm learning to let that be." She stopped, listened, then added, "Quieter now. I was once told that time would take me first. Turns out it took them." She saved the file, slid the recorder into the drawer, and didn't hear the chime until her phone lit up. A message from Caleb. Subject, anonymous, tip received. Preview, someone's leaking your recordings online? Joanne didn't react. She reached for her glasses. Her fingers were calm. "Orpheus," she said. "Start new file. Title, Exposure." The upright Baldwin had sat silent for years, its middle C a half-step too stubborn, and the bench wobbling just enough to irritate anyone with proper posture. Joanne called it character. On the first Saturday of September, she dusted it off, had Marcia re-oil the pedals, and posted a handwritten sign outside the garage door. Community Day, music, cookies, no permission slips required. By noon, 5 neighborhood kids had already wandered in with juice boxes and loud opinions. Sophie placed the sheet music on the stand, glanced at Joanne, and nodded once. "I'll handle the high notes." Joanne smiled. "Good, my ears like bass anyway." She sat, centered her fingers, and began. Not Beethoven or Bach, Not even anything from her old teaching binder, just a progression of chords that floated like memory, open fifths, call and response, a melody simple enough to sing without words. Sophie joined in, her part weaving over and through, brighter, faster, improvisational. Outside, a few parents leaned against their cars, then slowly drifted closer. Someone opened a folding chair. Another opened the Notes app on their phone. No one interrupted. When the duet ended, a kid in an oversized hoodie clapped first, then the others followed. Sophie gave a theatrical bow. Joanne just nodded, then lifted her chin toward the next child. "Your turn," she said. The boy hesitated, then sat beside her on the bench. She guided his hand gently. "That one's G. It always feels like a question." He played it once. Joanne smiled. "Good. Now answer it." That evening, a local Facebook page lit up with photos. Vision beyond sight. A grandmother and granddaughter duo captures a neighborhood. One photo showed Joanne mid-note, her face calm but glowing. Another caught Sophie mid-laugh, her fingers lifted just before striking the keys. The comment thread ran long. "This gave me chills. That's my niece with the juice box. We need more of this. Everywhere." Across town, Heather stared at the same post on her phone with a glass of something too strong in her hand and a suitcase half-zipped at her feet. David leaned against the doorframe, still wearing the same cynicism like a second skin. "You said she'd stay quiet," he muttered. Heather didn't respond. Instead, she clicked the image again, zoomed in on Joanne's face, blind but unbothered, fragile-looking but impossibly composed. David pulled out his wallet and tossed something onto the counter. "Sold the house," he said. "We leave next week." Heather's mouth opened, but no sound came. For once, she didn't argue. Back in Joanne's kitchen, Caleb reviewed the final disbursement forms. "It's official," he said, laying the notarized packet on the table. "Restitution came through. We routed it all into the scholarship, fully funded." "Good," Joanne said. "Will you announce it?" She shook her head. "No need. The music will find them." He smiled. Before he left, he paused by the piano, running one finger lightly along the edge. "Sometimes," he said, "the most powerful instrument isn't the one that shouts. It's the one that waits." That night, Sophie helped Joanne close up the house. She locked the side doors. Joanne turned off the front lights. When they met back in the hallway, Sophie reached for her hand. "You've never looked stronger," she said. Joanne paused. The house was quiet. The air had the faint smell of pine and tea leaves. She squeezed Sophie's hand once, then whispered, "Strength isn't what people see. It's what they can't undo." From the drawer behind them, the music box played softly on its own. Not broken, not silent, just waiting for the next question to answer. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and printer toner. Joanne liked it that way. Clean but grounded, like something in motion but never in chaos. Caleb adjusted the lens of the camera mounted on the tripod, then stepped back. The red light blinked on. Joanne sat centered, her cane propped neatly beside her, Orpheus glasses glinting faintly under the warm ceiling light. The legal binder sat closed in front of her, its black spine trimmed with gold foil. A pen rested on top, deliberate as punctuation. She took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just enough to mark the moment. "My name is Joanne Merrill," she began, her voice calm, unwavering. "This is my final legal will and testament. I am of sound mind. I am not under duress, and I have nothing left to fear." The silence in the room stretched respectfully. "I leave no property, no accounts, no authority, and no legacy to David Merrill or Heather Merrill. They have forfeited those rights by choice, not by accident." She paused, then continued. "Sophie Merrill is named sole heir and executor of all physical and digital assets. This is not an act of emotion. It is an act of clarity." Caleb's eyes flicked to the screen. The audio was clean. Joanne's voice didn't so much shake as settle deeper. If Sophie Merrill's well-being or autonomy is ever compromised by external forces, legal, familial, or otherwise, a guardianship review is to be automatically triggered. The trust will defend her the way she defended me. She reached for the pen without fumbling, her hand closing over it like it had done 1,000 times before. She signed the document with slow precision, then folded her hands in her lap. The red light clicked off. Marcia, who'd sat quietly just outside frame, stepped forward and placed one hand flat on the table. "For the record," she said, looking straight into the lens, "I've known Joanne Merrill for over 20 years. She taught me to listen with more than my ears. This woman saw everything, with or without sight." She stepped back, eyes shining but dry. Caleb stood next, carefully gathering the signed pages, the transcript, and the backup USB from the recorder. He sealed it all into a hard-shell envelope and handed it to Joanne. "This copy's yours. The rest are already filed." She nodded, then rose, the envelope tucked under one arm like a certificate no one could revoke. They walked to the fireproof safe together, Sophie joining quietly from the kitchen, no shoes, ponytail slightly frayed. Joanne knelt slowly, placed the envelope inside, and turned the dial. Click, locked. "That's the last copy anyone touches," she said. Caleb nodded. "It's airtight." Joanne exhaled, not as relief but as conclusion. "Then we're done." Sophie reached for her grandmother's arm, not to lead her, just to be beside her, and they walked together out to the porch. It was golden hour again. Sunlight flared through the trees like memory spilling through cracks. Joanne sat on the porch swing, Sophie settling beside her. The air was warm with late summer weight and the faint scent of rosemary from Marcia's garden across the street. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Then Joanne said softly, "I used to believe a will was just about what you leave behind." Sophie looked over. "And now?" Joanne's lips curved. "Now I know it's about what you refuse to carry forward." They sat in the silence that came after hard truths. Heavy, yes, but strangely gentle. Then Joanne reached into her sweater pocket and withdrew something small, a folded card, yellowed at the edges. She pressed it into Sophie's hand. Sophie opened it slowly. It was a line of poetry, in Braille. She named the silence, and it answered back. Before Sophie could speak, Joanne turned her face toward the horizon and whispered, "Let them hear that echo." The senior justice panel was hosted in the community auditorium, one of those old-school event spaces with beige carpet and too many folding chairs, all set in perfect rows like an obedient audience. Joanne's chair was positioned center stage, not behind a podium, not off to the side. Center. Sophie stood at the mic, palms lightly resting against the sides as the room settled. She wore black again, like she always did for moments that mattered, not for grief, but for gravity. "This," she said, voice steady, "is my grandmother. She doesn't miss a beat. She taught me that sight is just one way to see. She also taught me that memory doesn't fade. It sharpens, especially when no one believes you." She looked back toward Joanne and gave a small nod. The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was anticipatory. Joanne stepped forward slowly, her cane tapping in rhythm, Sophie by her side but not in front. Just present. She reached the chair, turned, and sat. Then she spoke. No notes, no script, just her voice in full. "My name is Joanne Merrill," she began, "and I'm not here because someone stole from me. I'm here because they assumed I'd let them." Silence rippled. Focus sharpened. "I was told I'd forget, that I'd fade, that I wouldn't have the energy or the voice to stand up for myself. What they didn't count on was how well I remember. Every detail, every withdrawal, every name." She paused, then added, "And how well I raised someone who remembers, too." Marcia dabbed at the corner of her eye from the third row, nodding so hard her earrings shook. Officer Tran sat next to her, spine perfectly straight, lips pressed but glowing with pride. Joanne continued, "My blindness didn't make me vulnerable. Their arrogance did. Their assumption that silence equals surrender." A low murmur of agreement rose near the back. Joanne reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small recorder. "This," she said, lifting it, "was my witness. Not a judge, not a lawyer, just this. And it was enough." She placed it gently on the table beside her. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm offering a blueprint. If someone's dismissing you, record it, archive it, turn their silence into evidence, and know this, you don't need to see them to hold them accountable." The applause started with one person, an older woman in the front who stood without hesitation. Then others joined, not out of shock or ceremony, but out of respect. A standing ovation, not for survival, but for authorship. After the panel ended, the auditorium foyer buzzed. Flyers were passed. Someone set out a donation jar with a handwritten label, Kenneth Merrill Music Fund. The jar filled faster than the lemonade beside it. Joanne sat at a table in the corner, answering questions from strangers who suddenly spoke to her like an elder, not a relic. One woman leaned in close. "You gave the rest of us permission." Joanne smiled faintly. "You always had it. You just forgot." By the end of the day, over 24 families had signed up to volunteer. 3 music teachers offered to donate lesson time, and a local business owner pledged to match all donations through the end of the year. Caleb called her from outside the venue. "Joe," he said, "your fund's already doubled, and the grant applications haven't even opened yet." Joanne replied simply, "It was never about numbers." He understood. "I know." That night, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Sophie sat with Joanne on the porch swing, scrolling through the photo thread from the event. "There's one of you shaking hands with the mayor," Sophie laughed. "You didn't even tell me." "I forgot he was the mayor," Joanne said dryly. "Thought he was just another man who wanted credit." Sophie grinned. "He probably did." They fell quiet. Then Sophie glanced up. "I haven't heard Heather's name all week. Not once." Joanne tilted her head. "That's not absence," she said. "That's erasure." The wind stirred the porch chimes once, clean and bright. Joanne looked toward the trees and added softly, "The difference is, this time, we wrote it." The application form went live on a crisp Tuesday morning. Simple interface, 3 tabs, one bold title across the top, "The Sharpest Note," a scholarship for blind or disabled students of music. Founded in honor of Kenneth Merrill and those who heard what others missed. Joanne didn't post about it. She didn't announce it. But by noon, 27 submissions had already arrived. Essays filled with phrases like, "I've never had someone believe in me before," and "I play by ear, but I dream in keys." Sophie read each one aloud from the sunroom, her voice trailing with emotion she didn't try to hide. Joanne sat in her usual chair, a cup of chamomile cradled in both hands, head tilted just enough to listen deeply. They spent 3 days sorting through the entries. By the end, Joanne had chosen 6, 2 for piano, 1 for cello, 1 for percussion, 1 who only had a mouth harp and a recorder, and 1 who didn't play yet, but wrote about hearing music in the trees. "The sharpest notes," Joanne said, "aren't always loudest. They're the ones you feel between measures." The house had changed in subtle ways. A new rug in the front hallway softened the floor where Joanne's cane used to tap sharp against tile. Sophie's violin case lived by the door now, propped beside that cane. Neither of them forgotten, both of them ready. Sunlight moved through the windows with unhurried purpose. The kitchen smelled of cardamom and rosemary. Sheet music had taken over the living room coffee table. There was no schedule, just rhythm. One morning, Caleb's email arrived with the final trust report. All assets secured, all filings complete, no legal vulnerabilities remaining. Attached was a single PDF labeled Merrill Trust Final Signed. Joanne didn't need to read it. She simply replied, "Acknowledged. Let the music play." Sophie, packing for college now, moved carefully, stacking books by subject, separating sheet music from poetry drafts, labeling boxes in bold, uneven handwriting. Every few hours she paused, walked into whatever room Joanne was in, and just stayed. One afternoon, they sat together in silence for nearly 20 minutes. Then Sophie asked, "Are you afraid?" Joanne didn't ask of what. She just shook her head. "Number, I've already arrived." Sophie rested her head on Joanne's shoulder, eyes closed. Later that evening, Joanne took a slow walk through the house. Her fingers traced the edges of the door frames. The small divot in the hallway where her cane had once caught. The groove in the piano bench where Sophie sat, knees tucked beneath her. In the entryway, she stopped. She reached out and touched the wall. There, engraved in both raised braille and clean black ink, was a quote she'd once whispered in passing, now made permanent by Sophie, who had paid a local craftsman to etch it. "Silence isn't the absence of power, it's where power gathers." The next morning, the mail arrived. Mostly catalogs, one thank you card from a student who'd won the scholarship, and a manila envelope with no return address. Joanne didn't open it. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked to the front door, propped her cane gently beside Sophie's violin case, and whispered something almost too soft to catch. "Balance." The house, warmed by morning light, stayed still. On her desk, the last page of her braille journal lay exposed, unbound, unsentimental. At the bottom, a single line. "She said I was useless. I blinked and wrote her out one signature at a time."